Greetings and welcome to Parks and Recreation Ontario's Virtual Educational Forum 2020. Delighted to have you with us today and see lots of people in the chat box saying hello to everyone. That's wonderful. Please remember to include the drop down that says to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see who you are and where you're from. At this time, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we recognize that our work takes place on traditional lands of the Indigenous peoples who have inhabited this territory since the beginning. We are grateful for the opportunity to work on this land and are mindful of broken covenants and strive to make this right with the land and with each other. And while we think about this very important statement, we will be starting in approximately 2 minutes. And now it's time to welcome you formally to Parks and Recreation Ontario's Educational Forum 2020. Delighted to have you with us today. And today is a kickoff to the second half of our conference because we're having our second keynote address today on new leaders for a changing world of work post-COVID-19. Now, before we get started, let's figure out how you can become engaged in this event and how you can say hello to fellow delegates. You do that by using the chat box. Please do use the drop down that says to panelists and all attendees so everyone can see who you are. Secondly, if you have any technical questions, use the chat box and our very talented and capable staff will be delighted to assist you. If you have a question for our presenter today, you can use the Q&A box. And when you use the Q&A box, if you like a question that somebody has already stated, just click on the thumbs up below the question, and that'll tell us how many people like that question, and that'll bump the question up so we make sure we answer the questions in order of interest. And then lastly, if you would like to make the screen larger or smaller, you can do so by just adjusting the bar beside the picture and beside the PowerPoint. However, probably don't need to do that today because our presenter is all in person, no PowerPoint. We're delighted to have Brenda doing that today with us. And before we say hello to Brenda, we would like to thank our title sponsor, Perfect Mind. Perfect Mind is a recreation registration software system based out of British Columbia, and they are friends to many people in the Parks and Recreation sector and have been working with Parks and Recreation Ontario for a number of years supporting the Educational Forum, and we thank them for their support of this virtual event. So now on to today's session. Oh, before we go on to today's session, let's learn how to win a gift card. And so if in fact you tweet about today's session, and there you have the hashtag Prontario and the @ProAtHome, as many times as you would like to enter and tag people, you can win a gift card. Or have your name go into a draw to win a gift card. So looking forward to having you share the great word about the session that's going to be going on today. And now let's start with the session, New Leaders for a Changing World of Work Post-COVID-19. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you Brenda Robinson. And Brenda is with the Robcon Group. She founded that group. She has, and so Brenda, if you'd like to join me, people can see who you are. She is a graduate from Brandon University with a Bachelor of Arts, and she has her Master's of Education from Simon Fraser University. There's Brenda. Brenda, hi.
Hello.
Brenda is joining us from a small town outside of Edmonton. So we're delighted to have you here this morning for you, Brenda. So I was just telling people a little bit about yourself, and I know you can't tell, but Brenda has been working in the field for over 30 years as a speaker, an author, trainer, and a consultant. And we've had the fortune actually of having Brenda in person at the forum a couple of years ago, and then also at the Pro Aquatic Conference. So we like her so much, and she has some great words of wisdom to share about working in the new world post-COVID-19. And so Brenda, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you while you entertain and educate us for the next hour. Thanks loads. Over to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Miriam. And I like the word entertain and educate. I've put them together and I call it entertainment. So I hope you enjoy today, and please do use the Q&A to give us some ideas of more information that you may need. So yes, it is actually it's noon now, so we're good here. We're all on afternoon time, and it is so nice to be a part of your conference. And yes, I remember being at Deerhurst, and I think I've been to a couple of other conferences and really enjoyed meeting people. So this is just part of our different post-COVID that we're starting to look at. So I'd like to launch right into it and give you a couple of things to think about. First of all, I think as leaders, as we move into this post-COVID era, very, very important for us to keep this in the back of our minds. Different is not difficult, as long as we understand different. And so we're going to take a look today at some of the differences that we need to be aware of, some of the differences that we'll need to address, and some of the things that may be challenges for us, but also learning opportunities for us as we move ahead in post-COVID-19. It's quite an interesting term. And I think one of the things that I'd like to ask you to think about right away is some of the things that you have observed, and that certainly I think we're all observing as we move through this era. First of all, I want to say to you that we've probably never lived in an era where our political leaders, federal, provincial, even regional, have shared as much information with us almost on a daily basis as we've had since COVID started. And as a result of that, and I know that sometimes we almost think, oh, well, that's overwhelming. I think as a result of all of that sharing of information, one of the very first differences that we need to be aware of is that people now have an expectation that information will be shared. In fact, I think we have moved completely out of the need to know era, and we've moved into a want to know era. So as you begin your fall programming, as you open your facilities, as you reach out to people with the services that you have, I think we need to be prepared to share more information internally, certainly, but externally as well. So I think one of the challenges we're going to face is how we get that information to people, how we share information with people, and how we respond to people's demand for information. However, the second thing that I'd like to mention is that we've probably never, and I can say this because I'm 70 years old and I've looked at it, I don't think we've ever had people asking us to be kind to each other, to be considerate of each other. And I think that too has created an expectation that indeed we will interact in a different way. And so more information, more positive information, more kindness for each other. These are things that people are asking us to do, and what a difference it's making. Now, I'm sure that the third thing that I'd like to address is that many of you have probably been working remotely or been away from your workplace for a period of time. And I think for a long time, we were very, very concerned that if people worked remotely, that we wouldn't get the same results. And I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but there's been a little bit of research done. This is the thing about post-COVID-19 is we're entering into an era where we don't really know what to expect. And so there's not a lot of sort of background for us to follow. However, there's been some research done in the health and wellness area. And so I'll clarify that for you, where people were working remotely. And the study came out saying that indeed, when people work remotely, productivity actually goes up by 16%. This was not an expectation that people expected, wasn't something that they were looking at achieving. And yet there seems to be some information that says, whoa, what's happening is different, but it may not be the problem that we thought it would be. And so when you think about these changes and the way people are approaching post-COVID-19, what I'd like to do in the time that we have is to suggest to you that there may be some strategies that as leaders we can use to address that. And so what I've put together is 10 little strategies that I'd like you to think about. And no, thank you, Miriam, for saying that. I'm not going to use a PowerPoint. I would rather have you listen and think and engage if you wish, because I don't think these are reading things or researching things. These are more things that we can do in our day-to-day work. So let's think about it. Strategy number one, I think, is, of course, and I already addressed it, we're going to have to provide more information. I don't think that as leaders, we can expect people to work without updates, without feedback, without feeling that they're involved and engaged and included. I think we're going to see people asking more questions and expecting to receive more information. So I'm going to start right away with one of the things that I think I've wanted to change for a long time, and maybe COVID-19 is going to give us that opportunity. I think we're entering an era where people will need more feedback on what they're doing, how well they're doing, and how they're achieving results than they've ever needed before. And I don't mind saying to you that for some people, that's a big change. I came out of an era, and some of you may remember this saying, and if you do, bear in mind that that was another era. I came out of an era where we used to practice something called no news is good news. If you haven't heard from me, then everything must be okay. If there's been no information, then it must be all right. And I think that that era has long gone. And I think that COVID-19 has pushed it right over the ledge and it no longer works. However, just so that you can share my thinking with me, I just want to share a little example of it. In one of my very early jobs, I was actually hired by a man. I still remember the interview. And towards the end of the interview, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience, I kind of knew I had the job, because one of the comments that he made to me at the end of the interview was, he said, well, Brenda, he said, one thing about working around here, and he would be my direct supervisor. He said, one thing about working around here is if you're doing okay, you won't see me. And I remember thinking, oh, that's how does that work? But I didn't say anything because I really wanted the job, and if that's the way it worked, I figured I could work with it. And so I was hired. And in all honesty, that is exactly how it worked. I worked there for, in fact, I clearly remember this, I had been there for 9 months. And in that 9-month period, I had actually only seen my direct supervisor 3 times. I saw him in the parkade and we waved to each other. I saw him at an all-staff meeting, but there were 40 people there and I was in the back row and we didn't make eye contact. I saw him at the Christmas party, but I wasn't at his table. And so for 9 months, I had been working at a job and I had not had any interaction with my direct supervisor. And I remember thinking, well, I must be doing okay, because remember what he said, if you're doing okay around here, you won't hear or see me. However, after 9 months, there was a new posting. It was a government position, and there was a new posting for a team lead in the same kind of area that I was working in. And I read the posting and I thought, oh, I would like that job. And so I remember thinking, that would be perfect for me. And I could use what I've learned here, and it would be a kind of a promotion, and it paid more. And so I decided I wanted to apply for the job. However, it was an internal posting, and the application said that in order to apply for the job, you had to have a recent EPA, Employee Performance Appraisal. Now, I had not had an appraisal. I had not even had any interaction with my direct supervisor. But I didn't want that to get in my way. I decided, well, then I'll just get an appraisal. So I remember, and I clearly remember doing this. I went to one of my coworkers. Aren't we interesting people? When we don't know what to do, we often ask other people who don't know what to do. It's not a very productive way to do things. I went to my coworker, Don, and I said, Don, did you see that new posting? He said, I did. He said, and I'd like to apply. And I said, me too. I'd really like to apply. But I said, it says we have to have an employee appraisal. And I haven't had one. Have you? And he said, no, I haven't had one either. And he'd been there almost a year as well. And so I said, well, then we'll need to get one so that we can apply. And so I said, so how do you get an employee appraisal? And he said, well, I don't know. It has to be done by your direct supervisor. And so I said, well, we should ask people who've already had one how they got one. So we kind of went around, but nobody gave us very much information. So then I said, well, then we should talk to Jane. Jane was our boss, and I don't mind. That's long ago and he's long gone. Perry's executive assistant. Perry was our boss. I said, we should ask Jane. She will be able to tell us. So we went to Jane and we said, Jane, we'd like to apply for that new posting. So we need to get an appraisal. So we'd like to set up a meeting with Perry. And I still remember her answer. Her answer was, oh, that's not the way it works around here. When Perry wants to see you, he'll call you in. Do you know that term? Call you in. Were any of you ever called into the principal's office? And on the way to the principal's office, did you think, oh, the principal must want my input into next year's curriculum? I don't think so. When people were called in, we usually assumed we were in trouble. Or perhaps you've been driving down the highway and the police come up behind you with lights and siren on. And do you think, oh, the police must want to talk to me about changes in the criminal justice system? No. When the police come up behind us, we believe we're in trouble. We usually think things like, oh, I must have been speeding. Oh, I'm going to be pulled over. And so when she said, he'll call you in, I thought, oh, I don't want to be called in. I'd like this to be kind of a mutual meeting. And so I said, well, can't we just set up a meeting? And she said, no. She said, if I get a chance, I'll talk to him, but you'll have to wait for him to call you in. And so I'm embarrassed to tell you the rest of the story here, but I didn't get called in. Neither did Dawn. And so the posting, instead of being internal, went external. And somebody was hired from the outside, and we were not happy about that. However, we went on with our work, and about 4 months later, and I've not forgotten the day, I was coming into work, and it's very interesting because for now over a year, I had been walking past Perry's office every day to get to my office, but his door was always closed. And so not because he was trying to keep people out, but he was hardly ever there. We were a research group and he was away a lot. And if he was in meetings. So I was used to his door being closed. And this morning when I came in, and I still remember it, I noticed that Perry's door was open. And isn't it interesting that we very quickly assumed that different is difficult? Different is a problem. I thought, oh, why is Perry's door open? And so I hurried. I remember I hurried to get by, but I guess I didn't hurry fast enough because Perry was in there and he called out to me, and this is what he said. Oh, Brenda, he said, there you are. He said, I've been wanting to talk to you. Come to my office at 3:30 this afternoon and we'll spend some time. Well, this was 8:30 in the morning. What do you think I did between 8:30 and 3:30? Well, I worried. I fretted. I sweated. I phoned my husband and said, I have to go in and see Perry this afternoon. You don't know what's going to happen. I rewrote my resume. I checked the job postings because, when we have no information, we create our own information. And sometimes we even create misinformation. And so after a couple of hours of doing all of that, I got lonely. So I went out and found Dawn and I said, Dawn, Perry wants to see me at 3:30. You're probably next. Because misery loves company. And when we don't know something, it's so much easier to deal with that if we've got somebody else who doesn't know either. And so Dawn said, really? He said, what do you think he wants to talk to us about? I said, well, I I don't know. He just said to be there at 3:30. And he said, well, we should find out what it's about. And I said, well, then we should ask Jane. So off we go to Jane again. And we said, Jane, Perry's calling people in. And Jane said, oh, do you think I'll be called in? And I said, well, I don't know. I just know that I have to be there at 3:30. But Jane didn't have any information for us either. And so because we had no information and because we didn't have enough to go on, we did what many people will do. We started to build a team. It fascinates me, and I tell people this all the time. Sometimes it's easier to build a negative team than it is to build a positive team, and that's exactly what we did. And so we went around gathering people up and saying to people, well, Perry's calling people in. So do you have any idea why Perry would be calling people in? And you know, by about, actually, we built such a good team, we even went for lunch together, something we'd never done, because we have a negative cause. And, you know, I'm going to say to you that I think we have to be really careful of that in this post-COVID-19 era, because I think people may look for the negativity. However, I have to tell you the rest of the story. By about 1:30, we decided that we knew what Perry wanted. We believed that indeed we had made a mistake about 6 months earlier in one of our reports. And we had fortunately, after a while, found the mistake and we'd corrected it. And nobody had ever said anything, so we assumed we must be okay. But now we've decided that Perry has learned about the mistake and that now we're all in trouble and that I'm just the first one. And so we were really annoyed about that because we thought, well, if he wanted to talk to us about that, he should have talked to us about that 6 months ago. So now we've decided that it's partly his fault. And, you know, it was very, very interesting because by the time 3:30 rolled around, I had up a head of steam. In fact, I still remember I kind of marched into Perry's office. I remember I sat down, I crossed my legs, crossed my arms, and I said, so what do you want to talk to me about? I was borderline arrogant because I was so upset about how this had occurred. And, you know, surprise to me, because what Perry wanted to talk to me about was that he gave me a raise and a promotion. I was now going to be a team lead of all those people that I'd spent all day stirring up. And how do you think that worked for me? Well, I will tell you, not very well. Because indeed, I bought into no information is not just no information, it's negative information. And so I think that as leaders, as you move into post-COVID-19, boy, are you ready? Because I think that people are going to need more information, more feedback, more encouragement, more support than they've ever needed before. And you know, when I look back on that, I think, oh my, all of the time and energy that we put into building that story. When in fact, if I were facing it now, why didn't I stop when Perry said, oh, Brenda, there you are. I want to see you at 3:30 this afternoon. Why didn't I stop and say, well, what is it we're going to talk about? Should I bring some of the reports? Do you need me to bring any information with me? But I didn't do that because I was operating in that world of no news is good news. And if somebody wants to talk to me, then maybe I'm in trouble. But I'm also going to give Perry some of the responsibility. Why didn't Perry say to me, oh, Brenda, there you are. I'd like to see you at 3:30 this afternoon. I've got some good news for you. Oh, what do you think I would have done between 8:30 and 3:30 if I had been preparing for good news? And so as leaders, as you move into this post-COVID-19 era, I want to challenge you. Are you ready to share more information, to provide more detail? Are you ready to give more feedback, more encouragement, and more support? Because I think that's going to be the demand that people will put on us today. Now, this is not to say that we're not going to be busy, because while we are, we've got a lot of work to do. But it also says to me that if we can bring people together to work on positive teams, that we will probably move through this era with a great deal more support. So when I talk about strategies, oh, and actually Donna just asked a question. Absolutely. I will forward the 10 strategies to Donna, and they can be forwarded to all participants at the end of the session. So please don't worry about that. But these strategies are about thinking not so much about what we do, because I know that you're in your field and that you have a professional approach and that you know what to do. I think the challenge for leaders post-COVID-19 is going to be how we do it together. I was talking to somebody, and it was interesting how the statistic has continued to change. Apparently, in most businesses, and particularly in health, social services, and recreation, we are now in our 27th year of do more with less. And I think as we return to a post-COVID-19 workplace, the demand is going to be there to get a lot done, and we may not have increased resources with which to do it. And so I'm going to say something to you that I say to everybody. We may not be able to continue to do more with less, but I think we can do differently and better together if we approach it in a strategic way. So let's think about those strategies. First of all, we have to share more information. Secondly, we have to provide more feedback. But I think the third strategy is to ask more questions. I really think that we are entering an era where we have to find out what it is that people need to know in order to work more effectively with us. And I think asking questions is one of the very, very best ways that we can approach people today to find out what it is that's going to create comfort for them. And I think that asking questions is a key. I think we also have to go into, and a fourth strategy is that we need to approach this era with confidence. And I think we have to go in it feeling that although it is different, it's a new normal. People are calling it a new normal. That we're not going back to our old workplace. In fact, I said to somebody the other day, no, you're not reopening. You're opening in a new way. And you know, I think the confidence to articulate that is going to be a huge part of leadership as we move into this new era. So one of the strategies and of having confidence, and fits right in, they pull together, is I think we have to be absolutely certain that we're not apologetic for the new approaches that we're going to take. Because some of you who've heard me speak before know that I've suggested for a long time that Canadians are way too sorry. And I think we have to move into this new era without apology. We can't apologize for what we can't do. We need to focus on what we can do. In fact, I'm saying to people that I think we almost have to break the habit. I do believe that Canadians have a little bit of a habit of apologizing. The phone is my age-old example, but it still happens to me on the phone. I phone and I say, good morning, this is Brenda Robinson. Could I speak to Diane? And when I get a live person, because you know now we don't always get a live person, but when I get a live person, I'm always surprised that when I say, could I speak to Diane, and Diane isn't available, I still get the answer that, I'm sorry, Diane's not in her office. And you know, that's not really helpful, because now I only know where she isn't. And it's very interesting to me, because when people apologize to me, it prompts me to ask questions that probably I shouldn't ask. And so I can't believe I've done it, but I have. So when they say, I'm sorry, Diane's not in her office, I catch myself saying, well, where is she? And you know, I'm surprised, because sometimes people say, I'm sorry, she's in a meeting. Well, I don't know how you feel about this, but being in a meeting is like being in the mail. I have no idea how long it will take, where it will last, what it's about. So I have now asked 2 questions. I've received 2 apologies, and I've received no information. And so then I say, well, when will she be back? And they say, I'm sorry, she won't be back till Friday. So by the time I hang up, I'm sorry I called. It's a very sorry place to work. I don't think I believe they're sorry anyhow. In fact, I think maybe Diane took the week off. And boy, I wish I could get a job where I could take a week off at a busy time like this. And so it generates all kinds of negativity. Wouldn't it be wonderful? I hope it happens in my lifetime. I would like to phone and say, good morning, this is Brenda Robinson. Could I speak to Diane? And I'd love it if somebody would say to me, well, Diane will be back first thing Monday morning. What would work best for you? Would you like to leave a message on her voicemail? Maybe you'd like to send her an email and she can respond that way. Or would you like to speak to Terry, who's in today? Gosh, I would be so busy making choices about what I can do that I wouldn't have time to make decisions about what you didn't do or can't do or won't do. So can I encourage you to incorporate in your strategies breaking the habit of apologizing? I don't think we have to apologize for this pandemic. It's not of our making. I think we have to encourage people to move ahead positively with what we're going to do now and what we're going to do that's new and what's different. And we have to get them focused on how that will work for them. And so when you think about it from a strategic point of view, it may sound like a little thing, but let's break the habit of apologizing and move ahead positively. And while I'm saying that, I think another strategy is that we need to focus on what's next instead of what's past. Let's remove from our vocabulary phrases like, well, we used to, or before. Somebody called it BP, before pandemic, or BC, before COVID. And I said, wow, I don't think we can do that anymore. We need to talk about what's next, because the workplace that we had before is not the workplace that we have today. And it's not the workplace that we're going to have tomorrow. And so I don't know about you, but I want to focus my energies on what's next instead of what's past. I want to focus my energies on what we can do instead of what we can't do. I want to focus my energies on how we can move ahead, not on what's the barriers or the stalls that keep us from moving ahead. And as leaders, I think it's going to be critical internally, but I think it's going to be critical to coach our folks to have this same approach with our external clients and customers and patrons, because that's how we're going to move ahead together. So it may be different. I don't think it's going to be difficult. And so another strategy that you can look at, and I think is a very important strategy for all of us, connected, of course, to the previous ones, is that we want to be focused on solutions instead of focusing on the problem. And I've joked about it for years, but Canadians love a problem. You tell a Canadian a bad weather story, they'll tell you a worse weather story. Tell a Canadian about a bad trip that you had, they'll tell you they had a worse trip in their experience. And so we often try to have a little bit of one-upmanship. And so I think it's going to be very challenging for leaders post-COVID to focus on solutions, to focus on what's going to work instead of focusing on the problems and the barriers. And so I think in your language, really going to want to talk about solutions and talk about ways that we can do things. And I think another strategy that we want to be aware of is, I don't think there's ever been a time when the demand has been so great for creative solutions. Because I think we're going to have to not only do things differently, we're going to need to find ways to do things that aren't from our experience or from our past experience, but are indeed stepping out and trying things in very different ways. But once we get people engaged in that, I think it's going to be huge. And speaking of engaged, I think that there's a strategy that involves 3 keywords. I'm going to give you those 3 keywords and see what you think. I think that we actually are entering an era where people want more than anything else to be engaged, involved, and included. I think some of that comes out of the shared information. I think some of that comes out of the volume of information that we've received. I think some of it comes out of the impact of technology and social media. But I don't think there's ever been a time when people felt that they should be so engaged, so involved, and so included. And I think it's also part of, and I know that I spoke with some of you about our new intergenerational workplaces, and I think some of it comes out of that. We have raised children today to believe that they should be engaged, involved, and included. And in fact, I think children returning to school this fall will be engaged and involved and included in making choices, making decisions, making plans for how they are going to exist and thrive in this new setting in their school. And I think the same thing's going to happen to you. I think people are going to want to be engaged, involved, and included in deciding not just what we're going to do, that for sure, but also in deciding how we're going to do it. Okay? I use a little example. A young man who lives not far from me. He's 14, but he was 12 when we had this conversation. He and I were out in the yard, and he came out and he said, "Oh, hey, Brenda." I love the informality. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. The informality of new generations. "Hey, Brenda," he said, "you won't believe what I just did." And I said, "Oh, Brandon, what did you just do?" He said, "I just planned the family's winter vacation." I said, "Oh, Brandon," because he's 12 years old. I said, "Oh, Brandon, how did you do that?" And he said, "Online with my dad's credit card." And some of you who know and looking at me, you know that I would be a little shocked because, when I was 12 years old, I don't think my dad engaged, involved, and included us in vacation planning. As a matter of fact, I think he said, "Get in the car and don't ask how much further," because in that era, people didn't expect to be engaged, involved. I said, "Oh, Brandon," I said, that's amazing. I said, "How did you decide what the family was going to do?" And he said, a real learning for me, "Well, we had 3 family meetings," he said, "and we all shared our information about where we'd like to go and what we'd like to do." And he said, "I gathered all of the information and I put it all together, and we reached a consensus." I'm going to tell you, folks, when I was 12, I didn't know the word consensus, but Brandon is telling me they reached a consensus. And he said, "And then I went off with that information and did my research." Well, Brandon is part of our new client, our new patron, our new customer. And as a matter of fact, very quickly, Brandon's going to be part of your staff, because indeed what we're finding is that there's a different expectation today for how we make decisions. In fact, maybe this is a nice little thought for you. I think we have to learn to be as engaged in decision-making as we are in decisions, because I think the process of making decisions is very important to people who want to be engaged, involved, and included. And so as part of your strategy as a leader in post-COVID-19, you may want to be thinking about, how do I engage, involve, and include people in decision-making so that when the decisions are made, I can continue that engagement, that involvement, that inclusion, and get the very best results. Because we know that in this new era, we are going to have to do things differently. And we want to make different, not difficult, just different. And so asking questions, sharing information, gathering information, reaching consensus, letting people know that they've been heard. These are going to be strategies that I think are going to be where leaders want to invest their time. We have to be very aware, because as we move through change, and change is very, very difficult, that people will want to fall back on what was. And so we have to challenge people to not only move with us, but maybe even think about how they can change the way they've always done things to the way things are now. So I'm going to offer you a little challenge, and it's not embarrassing or hokey, so we can certainly do it. Could I ask you to please put your hands in the air, as I have done on the screen? Put your hands in the air, and without really thinking about it, would you put your hands together in the folded position? Now, I think most of you probably did it very quickly, very comfortably, very easily, because that's the way you've always done it. Now I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit different. I want you to take your fingers apart, move them over one, and fold them again so that they're in a different order. Now, I would imagine that for some of you that feels a little awkward, a little uncomfortable. Maybe it even feels not normal, or maybe you just like to get out of it. However, I'm going to offer you a challenge. I now want you to take your hands apart and stare at them. Please be sure and tell people that you stared at your hands in a webinar today. And without too much thought about it, I would like you to put them back together. And I know that we can't interact the way we typically might, but I'm just wondering, did some of you go back to the normal way, the old way, the original way, or the comfortable way? Or did some of you go back to the new way, the different way, the creative way of folding your hands? Because I'd like to show you something. There's actually two ways to fold your hands. And if you practiced as I have, you would be able to fold your hands in two different ways. That, to me, is an example of post-COVID leadership. We have to be able to do things in different ways. In fact, while you're at it, and just for fun, would you cross your arms in front of you, please? Very good. Now, would you cross them the other way? And it feels awkward. However, it's just two ways of doing things. And if you practice, as I have, you would be able to do it in two ways. So when I talk about a changing world, I'm going to say this to you. I think that one of the strategies for leadership post-COVID-19 is to challenge people to change, and to challenge them to change by practicing with them, by encouraging and supporting, by sharing information, by asking questions, by engaging, involving, and including them. Because I think that as we move into post-COVID-19, it isn't going to be about back to normal. It's going to be a new normal with some of the old normal in it and some of the new normal as we move ahead. And so I'm going to give you three more words that I want you to be aware of as a leader. I think three keys to leadership in post-COVID-19 are these three words: adaptable, flexible, and responsive. Because as we move into this new era, this new normal, I think that we're going to find ourselves making small changes, sometimes making big changes, making adjustments, adapting, being flexible, being responsive, because indeed it's a new journey. We haven't been down this road before. It's a new journey. And as a matter of fact, it may be a new journey without a specific map to guide us. But it doesn't mean we're lost. It means that we are going on an adventure. And this new normal is going to be part of our adventure. So as you think about moving into the post-COVID era, I think that some of these strategies are going to be very, very important to you. And you know, creativity very often comes out of discussion and interaction. So if we engage, involve, and include, we may find that we get more creativity, we get people giving us new ideas, we get people challenging us. And somebody said to me, oh, it just feels so heavy, it feels like such a chore. And I said, well, you know, I'm preferring to look at it this way. Post-COVID-19 can be a challenge or a chore, and I'm going for the challenge. Because I think that if we can do the things that bring people along with us, that indeed this may be something that we can engage, involve, and include people in to the point where we can all enjoy it. And as a matter of fact, that is another strategy. Let's not forget to have fun while we're moving through this post-COVID era, because I think having fun is going to get people engaged in a much better way than feeling, well, in fact, I say it to people, sometimes we get so serious about things that indeed the seriousness overwhelms the effectiveness. And so we want to have a little fun. And part of that fun is a final strategy. And I think that the post-COVID-19 era is going to move us out of an era of formality and into an era of friendly. Because I think that we have to recognize that indeed some of our structures, some of the ways we always did things, some of our templates, some of the things that we have in place are just not going to fit the new era. And so it's going to be a move from formal to friendly in order for people to engage and feel like they're part of this new era. And so I think that there's going to be room. There's going to be room for some creativity, room for some fun, room for people to engage positively, because I think that some of the things that we typically did were very much based out of a different era. And so here we go. It's an opportunity for us to indeed engage differently. So we can ask instead of tell, we can engage people humorously, we can build positive teams, we can get people the information that they want, not just the information that they need, the information that they want. But I will say to you that I think one of the cautions I offer people is that we want to be absolutely certain that in this new era, we don't fall into missing the old one so much that we forget to celebrate the new one. And so I think it's about finding the balance. And I think that balance is such a critical part of working in this new era that we want to try to figure out how to balance task and people, balance information with over information, balance good news with corrective news as well. So it's all about the balance. And so I want to pull it together with a little example of balance that I think might pull these strategies together for you. And so I'm going to give an example from my childhood, and I'm going to say to you, I'm going to use a teeter-totter as a parallel. In fact, I always say to people, do you remember being on a teeter-totter without your helmet? Because as you well know, if you're in recreation, the world has changed and safety has become a key. And please keep in mind that safety is a key in post-COVID. However, when I was a child, we had teeter-totters that I will tell you probably would have had a crime scene tape around them today because they weren't very safe. In fact, in our schoolyard, we had a teeter-totter that was actually just a very long, I think it was a 2x6 on a steel rail or on a post rail. And I do believe that at one point the teeter-totter had been strapped to the railing, but I think the straps had worn out. So our teeter-totter not only went up and down, it went back and forth. And so it was quite a challenge to be on this teeter-totter. And I don't mind telling you, and maybe I should be embarrassed about it, but one of the favorite things in our schoolyard was to give kids the bumps. We used to get kids on the end of the teeter-totter, and then we'd get enough people on the other end to slam it down and throw the kids on that end off. It was an awful activity when I think about it, but that was our teeter-totter. However, it wasn't always used for that kind of activity. Every now and again, and I have no idea why it happened or what prompted it, but every now and again in our schoolyard, we would all race out at recess. Now, I went to a small country school, so there were probably only 20 some kids in our school, 20 some kids ranging from grade 1 to grade 9, I might add. So we had a variety of children, but sometimes at recess we would all race out to the teeter-totter and we would all get on the teeter-totter. Can you imagine this? 20 kids on the teeter-totter. And the goal was not to go up and down and throw people off. The goal was to see if we could get all 20 kids on that teeter-totter and balance the teeter-totter. And you know, it fascinates me to this day, but we could do it. And what did it require to do it? Well, it required a great deal of communication because everybody had to be talking about move back, move up. People had to play specific roles. We had a skinny little girl named Donna. Sometimes we had to take her off one end and put her on the other end. We had a great big kid named Philip. He was, I'm sure he weighed 240 pounds. The only place for Philip was in the middle of the teeter-totter. But if people would play their roles and if people would communicate, and listen to this, if everybody would be willing to adapt and adjust and respond and be flexible. Some kids had to move up, some kids had to move back. Some kids had to trade places. There was a lot of work to achieve balance. However, as I say, it fascinates me to this day, we could achieve balance. And when we achieved balance, what do you think we did? Well, there's a huge cheer, and we all jumped off the teeter-totter. Then we got back on and tried to do it in a different way. I think the teeter-totter is a good parallel for post-COVID-19 because I think we are on it together. We are all working on it together, and we need to communicate. We need to share information. We need to adjust. We need to be willing to play different roles. And I think leaders in post-COVID-19 are on that balancing act. So I want to encourage you. Think about it not as a problem. Think about it as an adventure or a challenge. Think about it not as what we used to do, but what are we going to do now? Focus on what's next instead of what's past. Share more information, give more feedback, encourage and support, build teams. And when you have successes, celebrate those successes because that's what's going to move us on in post-COVID-19. So I realized that it's exactly 12:50, which was my timeline. And I do want to leave a little bit of time in case there are questions or comments. But before I go to that, can I just say thank you to you? Thank you for being a part of this session. Thank you for participating. Thank you for folding your hands. Thank you for thinking of your teeter-totter. And just thank you for being leaders in post-COVID-19. You'll do okay. It will be fine. We're moving ahead. Thank you so much. And I will turn it back to you, Marion.
Thanks, Brenda. That's great. Really appreciate that. And maybe if you can just stay up on the screen there, that would be great. Because,
I will.
Yeah, that's great. Because we do have a question or two. So I just want to ask you in terms of the building the positive team. So lots of people are working virtually and will be doing that for a while. So do you have any suggestions in terms of how to be virtually building teams? Have you come across anything like that?
Well, you know, it might seem strange for a 70-year-old woman to tell you this, but I'm going to say it. Love your technology. Get into it because it's very interesting. I was talking to somebody who said, you know, we have worked remotely for years, but we never used Zoom until pandemic came along. We didn't use Click Meetings. We didn't use Teams. We've got a lot of resources out there. We can stay in touch. And I do think we have to stay connected. There's a funny little ad on TV about being connected. And it said the most important connection today is your connection to technology. Use the technology that you have. And if that's what you need to do, pick up the phone. Be in touch with people. I think we can't use it as an excuse to be isolated. We have to use it as a way to be connected. So there's a little preach from somebody for whom technology was not my first love.
And then there's another question about information, and maybe you've addressed this a little bit, but in terms of information and maybe information overload, like how much information is too much information to share?
You know, I've been thinking about that because we are feeling a little bit of the information overload. I think this is where we have to ask people. We have to ask them, how much information they want and need and get an idea of it. And we have to engage people in letting us know when they have enough. However, I would worry less about having too little than I would about too much. And so I think sometimes I just have to give myself permission to share more and let people tell me when it's too much. I'm not going to decide that for them. I'm going to give them as much information as I can. A good little article that I read said that people are very conditioned today. We're the multi-stimulus generation. We are used to receiving more information than we've ever received before. So let's not judge for them. Let's ask them when it's enough.
Good point, because that's what you've been saying all the way along in terms of engaging and informing and including and all of those good words that start with vowels for some reason. It's a great concept. I think you've done a wonderful job, Brenda, in terms of encouraging us to think about how we can challenge ourselves and how we can challenge those with whom we work, how we bring them on the journey with us, and how we do it with kindness. That's a great commentary to start with, and also I think to finish with. So I'm not seeing any more questions that are coming up on the screen or in the chat box. But if in fact you have some comments for Brenda, I'm sure you can put them in the chat box, because we do want to say that we do have a great comment. Thank you very much for your words of encouragement is one of our feedback. So that's just great. And we do have just a couple of closing announcements. Again, you can stay on the line here, Brenda, as we go along, because you might be interested too in the new essential tools that Parks and Recreation Ontario has been promoting in addition to our COVID page on our website. We have Principles of Healthy Child Development C, which is an online version of a formerly in-person training program. So looking to engage people that way. And then also our national organization, the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association, has a new information database called The Bench. And so we're also promoting that. Oh, look, wonderful presentation. Thank you, Brenda, for your insights and experiences. Great presentation, thank you. Excellent speaker. Oh, this is feedback, and you like the feedback. And speaking of feeding back, don't forget your Starbucks reward card that you can be applying for, and hope that some of you were sharing some of the insights that Brenda shared with us today. And also, I do want to mention that we have a next event taking place, and it's actually taking place next week. And it's on designs, programs, and technology, innovative trends now and for the future. We had an opportunity to see the presentation a little bit earlier this week, and it's interesting to see where we're going and what we're doing. So you can take those 10 strategies that Brenda just spoke about and start to think about them as you watch how design and technology will be shaping our future in a new and different way. And then lastly, we have a thanks to our sponsor again, to Perfect Mind. And we hope that you join us next week. Oh, look more. Oh, we've got somebody who's folding her hands back and forth many, many times. So that is just absolutely wonderful. Brenda, you've touched out to people over the internet, and every time we'll be folding our arms, we'll be thinking of you, okay? Just so you know that. So thank you very much again. Thanks to everyone. And we will see you in another week, and stay well and have a great long weekend for everyone. We'll say bye now.
Bye-bye. Take care.